Thanks, guys. Hey, so I'm Chris. Like you said, I got real obsessed with this project for a little while. So I want to talk about kind of what I found. We'll talk about the tools that I used in this project. It went real weird. So first things first, this is not a data science presentation, just to like set expectations. Because what I used was like super simple. I used some pretty simple tools, and I'm really bad at pandas, so I really didn't use much of that at all. We'll talk about the tools that I use later. I'm not going to be showing a lot of the actual code that I used because a lot of it was just scraping a website, running a couple Python functions. All that is up on my GitHub profile. We can talk about that later. I'll send out some links. Some more disclaimers. My data isn't fully up to date right now. There are millions and millions of comments. I'm still kind of analyzing it. A lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about now is from a chunk of data that I analyzed early on. The data is messy. It's from users, so there's a lot of really weird stuff in it. I'm going to be kind of hand-waving for time, but I'd love to answer questions after. This is something I found super interesting. So, all right, what is the FCC issue? I assume a lot of people have heard about this FCC proposal. Show of hands if you're familiar with the issue. Yeah, so it's basically, you could call it an issue of net neutrality, which I think it is. And so it's the head of the FCC wants to roll back Title II regulations on ISPs. There's a lot of complexities about this. John Oliver did a good segment that brought a lot of people to know about this. So I would Google that. There's a really good YouTube video about it. But the main thing to know for this is kind of the sides in this argument. And basically, the sides, as I see them anyway, is that most tech people do not support this, and most ISPs would very, very much like this proposal to succeed. So that's kind of like where people's motivations come from in this. And so I was really interested in looking at the data and seeing like, what the overall sentiment was, and then I kind of found that the sentiment was being manipulated by some of these programs. So what are public comments? The public comments, anytime the FCC has a proposal, they want to do something, they actually solicit public comments. And this doesn't come up a lot because usually it's really specific FCC things. But in this case, it's a big issue that affects a lot of the internet. And so there are millions and millions of comments where normally they get a few hundred or maybe a few thousand. And mostly it's from companies. But in this case, like you could log on today and leave a comment on an FCC proposal. It's fully public. So the comments aren't an actual vote. Mainly they're used for like legal arguments and things like that. However, public sentiment has helped sway things before. In 2014, there was a similar proposal that was put forward. And some of the public outcry really seemed to sway how things went. So another note, comments are submitted via web form directly to the FCC. They're submitted over an API that I'll talk about in a second, and they're submitted by CSV, which is terrible. So the FCC actually has a comment API. Last time I looked at this in 2014, you actually had to scrape the website, and like kind of they were talking about with Selenium, it really does not work well at all. Their website was super slow. It was almost impossible to get the data out. But they return JSON now, which is amazing. So and with an API key, you can actually post comments, which is maybe not the best thing. We'll talk about that in a second. And this API actually drives the front end for how the FCC displays the comments to users. So they have a website you can go and you can kind of search for names, you can filter by dates and things like that, and that all connects up to the API, and that's what I use. So let's take a look at the JSON. Every comment has a unique ID. Hey, we all know about this. All comments usually have this address. All comments have this address segment, but it's not always filled out. So this isn't required information in the form, but it's often filled out, and that became pretty important later. There's a contact email. So when you actually fill out this form, they ask for your email address. That email address isn't shown on the web front end, but it is shown in the API. That was also super important for studying it. You get a number of dates. This date is the date that the user actually submitted the comment to the FCC. These dates are both the same. I don't know why they have two of them. And then there's another date that shows when it's disseminated. So that's when it shows up on the website. So my hypothesis is they have like some kind of internal queue, and they pull all the comments in and they index them periodically to the website. So when I was kind of ordering comments and displaying graphs, I was doing that based on the date received and not the date posted, because you see these big spikes with the date disseminated. So then you get the text data. This is actually my comment. That was all my data. So I'm not leaking other people's addresses. Some other really interesting things. So I started kind of poking at this JSON and seeing what other data I can kind of pull out of it. And the main thing I found was this proceedings key. So this is almost like a foreign key. It's always a list, and it always has exactly one element in it. So I don't know why they didn't just make it a dictionary instead of a list. But basically, it shows what proceeding this is connected to. In this case, this is connected to restoring internet freedom, which is the name of this one. But as we can see, this is like super beefy. It's got a lot of information. It shows like the total number of comments at this point, which at the point I made my comment, it was 600,000. Now it's 13 million. I meant to look it up before I went on stage. But in any case, this is like information that somebody normally wouldn't have when they're posting in. And I made my comment directly to their website. And so basically what I figured out is that any comment that has this beefy proceedings key was made directly to their website and not over the API. So I use that to kind of differentiate the source where the comment came from. It's the same, there would be this key that has browser and it would say open CSV box if it was a CSV comment. I figured that out at some point. Sometimes it would say like open CSV box 3. I think they started spinning up other servers. This isn't available in all comments, but that's kind of how I figured out where it was coming from. So the tools that I used, again, pretty boring. I used Elasticsearch as a data store. It turned out that they were actually storing their data in Elasticsearch, so that was like a super good fit because I could just pull their data down with Python and then slam it right into Elasticsearch. So I crawled the API and I indexed my own Elasticsearch box with Python, and those scripts are all up there. And then I had a separate Python process that went through and it analyzed each one of these and stored information on the comment itself so that I could do a little bit more analysis. I'll talk about those tags in a second. And I used Kibana, which is basically, it's a web front end on top of Elasticsearch. And it is just a really easy way for you to kind of like look at data trends. And that was super helpful because with this, like I was trying out a lot of hypotheses. And when I had to like rerun my Jupyter notebook a bunch, I'm just like not good enough at it, and it ended up being a little too slow for me. Mostly due to my own competence, I think. But so tagging, I started grouping by source. So I couldn't find a source for everything, but one thing that people noticed pretty quick, and I noticed, was that there are a lot of duplicate comments. These are the comments that people are suspecting that were coming from bots. And so I started grouping by, hey, what are these duplicate comments? What are these form letters? And using my Python process to kind of tag those in Elasticsearch so I could study them further. Another thing I studied, was there a full physical address? So that made a person seem more real, right? If you put in your full like address, city, state. And where did the comment come from? Did it come from the web? If it was submitted directly on their website, that's going to be a little bit harder to bot. The API is going to be easier. CSV is going to be extremely easy. Anybody could do that. So I want to kind of look at some of the bots that I ran across first. So this first bot, this is a sample of the message. It says some stuff about the Obama administration and smothering regulation, and I don't really believe this to be very accurate, but this is apparently what 800,000 people believe. Commonalities in this. So I was looking at like what do all of these comments have in common? Pretty quickly, it was like obviously duplicate text. The weird thing is these all seem to be real people. So you would think they would be making up fake information and stuff, but like if you found one of these comments and you looked at that name and you Googled that person, maybe you found a Facebook account or something, they live in that town and they live at that address and that's their email. Like these are all real people's information being used here, which was immediately extremely weird. We'll talk about where I think that came from later. Another weird thing I immediately noticed is almost all the emails were in all caps for this bot, which was not the case for anything else. So clearly their program is transforming the emails to all uppercase, which was very weird. This was the case in almost all of them, except for maybe 200, which was a group that I focused on later. And then the other weird thing, well, this isn't weird. They're submitted over the API, obviously. But because they're submitted over the web API, I can plot a graph of them like so, based on their comment rates. And that looks pretty suspicious. I guess I should have shown a comparison of what like real traffic looks like, but it does not look like this. Obviously, we have very flat rates here. It's starting and stopping. And with almost all the bots, you did tend to see this pattern. there weren't blank spots for any of the things that were submitted over the web generally. You know, you kind of saw over the course of the day as people got off work or somebody posted an article about this that the volume would rise and fall throughout the day. Not the case with these. So the second bot, I'm calling this Free Our Internet because that's the group I think it came from. This is the message. Again, Obama, George Soros, efforts by the tech left and liberal globalists. I think it was something like 500,000 people believe this. I don't know. Commonalities, again, duplicate text, full addresses, again, real people, emails provided, submitted by CSV in huge groupings. Just going to run through this next one. This is Taxpayers Protection Alliance. I found this text used in a form on their site. I don't think all these came from their form though. Again, Obama, FCC, smothering regulations, yada yada. Pretty much the same thing, duplicate text, full addresses, emails provided, submitted by CSV in huge groupings. And then when we plot these, so this is kind of weird. So obviously with CSV, you're going to see a huge spike, right? Because they all have the same timestamp. But if you look here, I'm plotting the one on the last two bots I talked about are the two things on the top here. And you see they almost have the exact same volume at the exact same times. And obviously like their CSV ingestion script is on some kind of a cron job or something like that. So that's normal. You see those kind of breakups in terms of the CSV data. But here, like the volumes look kind of the same for each one of these. And that's not the case with the other stuff that comes through, which is real weird. So this last bot I just kind of want to focus on is this one's super weird because so after I put up my blog post and a number of other people put up a blog post, there's a lot of press about this bot issue, and I figured that might change people's behavior because the bots were very simple. They're passing in the exact same text for everything, as far as I could tell. So this next one I found pretty interesting. I don't know if you guys can you read that? So those are 3 different comments. Let me just give you a second there, see if you can see some patterns. Yeah, well, no, these are 3 separate comments. So I've separated them into paragraphs here. But so those are 3 separate comments there. It might be a little bit helpful if we zoom in on the first sentence, which is this. And this is, there are maybe 2 million of these comments now. And so if you see, this is clearly made with like some kind of a recursive grammar. So you can actually create the grammar that generates all of these. None of these are identical, but they all mean pretty much the same thing. So you see there's sometimes a greeting. They have different things that they call Title II. They call it the Open Internet Order. They call it Restoring Internet Freedom. And you can actually, I made a regex that matches one of these sentences and was able to match them all that way. This is basically, it's like, not a Markov chain, but it is a recursive grammar. I've actually done this making a Twitter bot before, so I like had some experiments with it. All right, it's fine. This was not a bad Twitter bot, okay? It corrected people's spelling. If you want to look it up, it was called Stellar Speller, Stellar misspelled. So why do I think these are bots? Some of this is pretty obvious, and I kind of talked about it already. The comment rates are suspicious. There are a lot of flat rates. There are a lot of blank spots. There are unnatural distributions compared to other sources. You know, they don't ebb and flow throughout the day. My main thing as a programmer, the data is way too good. So the addresses are full. They're well formatted. There are no obviously fake emails, addresses. Anybody who's like put a web form online, you know, people put in like, oh, I'm Fakey McFakerson. I live at 123 Fake Street. And like, in terms of a lot of the real comments, people did that kind of thing. People don't want to put their personal information into these web forms. And so if you're looking at some of these pro-net neutrality web forms, you find a lot of like fake emails and things like that. Not the case with these. These are all real emails, real addresses, real people. Another weird thing, almost nobody's submitting multiple times. Another thing, if you've ever worked on the web, again, people submit forms multiple times because they didn't think it went through, because they want to game the system, because they're bored. I don't know. Almost nobody is submitting these multiple times. In fact, for some of these bots, like I think the maximum was exactly 2, and you chart them in bands. They came in bands of time. So like their script restarted at some point or something like that. Very weird. The next thing I did is I wondered where the data was coming from, and on a whim I checked. Has anybody used ever haveibeenpwned.com? It's like, so it's a website. It's a website. You can put your email address in. It shows if your email address has showed up in any data breaches, basically. So I went and I basically checked 1,000 of these accounts against the API. And specifically, I noticed that a lot of these accounts that were in the suspected bot groups showed up in breaches that had physical addresses involved, which is like something more rare. Right? Normally when you show up in a data breach, like somebody gets your email and maybe like a hash of your password or something like that. But so I asked a question. I wrote a script to figure out, okay, for 1,000 of each one of these groupings, what's the percentage that showed up in a physical breach? And so obviously the top 3 columns here are the suspected bots. There's a control column cut off below, but that's about 20% if I remember correctly. And Battle for the Net is a pro net neutrality form. And so what I was seeing is on the normal population, normally 30% of people have been involved in some kind of physical breach in terms of all of the comments I was looking at. But obviously, the suspected bot comments showed up more often in breaches. And I think that's probably because they come from some kind of data warehouse. And that data warehouse, some of that data ended up in a breach at some point. That's my hypothesis anyway. Another just a practical issue, these aren't visible campaigns that they're running. You know, these aren't organizations with a ton of Twitter followers. They're not getting a lot of traction online as far as I could tell. And in some cases, I couldn't find any of the forums that they say this is coming from. Like they don't list the forums obviously on their website. And they claim that they were basically running ads to push these forums to users and that users were filling out millions of these forms. And if anybody's ever worked with internet advertising, like I don't think their click-through rates were that good. And then the biggest reason I think these are bots is because we asked a bunch of the submitters. So after I put up my blog post, there were a number of other guys who'd written similar blog posts. So we kind of got together in a Slack channel, and one of the guys had a connection at a university where we could send out some email surveys like this. And we could only send out a few hundred a week, so we couldn't get huge sample sizes. But we basically got some random samples of some of these different groups, and we sent them an email and said, hey, the FCC has record that you made this comment at this time. Did you make this comment? Yes, no, I'm unsure. And this is the result we got. So let me, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit probably. So Free Our Internet, which is the top one, that's a thing we suspect is a bot. So the sample size here was 100. Obviously, that's really low. We had no yeses, 9 no's, 1 I'm unsure. The next one, like we talked about, this unprecedented bot, a lot of the emails were all caps. So my hypothesis was those are the ones that are coming from the script, and the lowercase ones are the real ones. And that kind of was borne out here because, so we sent out 500 emails to this group. 25 people said, no, that's not me. 3 said yes. We talked to a couple of those people. One guy said he accidentally made a comment, but he's actually a pro net neutrality support. It was very weird. The unprecedented lowercase, 39 of them said yes, which is a bigger response rate than we got out of almost, and I would expect anybody who's filling out this form probably cares a lot. Battle for the Net, which is a pro net neutrality form, we had 29 yeses, 0 no's, 2 I'm unsure. Again, this is only out of 100, and then the control sample, 38 said yes. We didn't have any no's or unsures on that. So obviously the sample sizes are small, but that to me said there's obviously something fishy going on here. What is the FCC going to do about it? Probably nothing. They say that they have no control over who submits to them. They also complain that they were DDoSed by pro-net neutrality advocates. They have been claiming a lot of very weird things. They won't tell anybody what the API limit is. They seem to really just want to accept this data. And hopefully enough people will complain about it. That's not the case. But right now, it really seems like they're just kind of going to ignore this issue. So that's it. Any questions? Thanks. Yeah.
How many times did you hit the API?
I hit it a lot. I could do pages of 1,000, and then my Python script was multi-threaded, so I could get multiple pages at a time because we're talking about millions and millions of comments here. But yeah, it ended up being more data than I was used to working with for sure. especially after the first few days. Yeah.
How did Elasticsearch perform with all that data?
I performed pretty well. I just used a box on AWS, and that turned out to be pretty good because I could kind of spin it up and down, and that worked out pretty well. I had to increase the size a couple times as we got more comments, but yeah, that was about it. Yeah.
You know how many comments total you got?
I would have to look right now. I think right now I have somewhere around 10 million comments, and I think total there are like 12 million maybe. I think they're still processing some, so that number's been changing lately. Yeah.
Did you put out a press release, or how did the press find it?
So I just posted this on Reddit, but I also I emailed a couple of journalists. I had contacts through some friends. I used to work at The Onion, and so they're part of Gizmodo now, and so I was able to reach out to one of their reporters, and she used some snippets from my post in a post there. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you were classifying a lot of different bots, it was purely based on the text?
It was mostly based on the text. It wasn't exactly the text, right? Because sometimes the text does change.
Right.
But yeah, that was the way I was classifying them. In a couple cases, I would maybe do a classification based on some of the properties that came through, because you can kind of choose that preceding key we were talking about. As far as I can tell, people can post kind of whatever they want into that, because that did vary from source to source. But generally, it was just based on the text, and that seemed to be pretty accurate. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you consider anything else other than Elasticsearch, like Mongo or?
I knew that they were storing the data in Elasticsearch, and I had a lot of competency in Elasticsearch, so that was just the tool that I had in my toolbox. I'm sure there are other things that would be equally good, but yeah.
So does the FCC, I don't suppose, is going to give IP addresses?
No, they are not. I think it would be great is if maybe they had some kind of ID per API key, and if they put that ID into the data so that we would actually know, hey, this came from this API key. I think that would be super helpful for people studying things like this. I mean, the only way to kind of stop this would be the FCC actually changing their web services to do something about it. And in fact, for the CSV upload, they give you a template CSV that anybody could go into Excel, and you can put as much data in as you want, and you just upload it through an unsecured form. And yeah.
How did you originally suspect that there were bots on this website?
People noticed it really quickly. People noticed that the duplicate text was getting spammed, because there's a homepage you can go to, and you can see all of the comments, and it kind of shows some random ones at the top, and you would see they're all the same on one day, and that's kind of how people on Reddit started to notice that kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know how much time we have. Got somebody cut me off. Yeah.
Entries did you have when you did the analysis, and how much has it increased?
It's increased. When I first looked into it, there was maybe a little over 1 million, and currently, like I said, there's I think yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Is there any way to do a FOIA request about who and
Yeah,
what
so-
have you? Have they issued an API key too?
Yeah, so people have definitely tried to do some FOIA requests around this, and the FCC has kind of been denying those. So people did specifically FOIA requests around information about this supposed DDoS of their service, which I suspect was just John Oliver viewers going to post comments there. And they claim that they don't have any logs about that, but then they claim, no, we do have logs, we just didn't give them to you in the FOIA. There's some really weird things. I know that there are some journalists that have put FOIA requests in around some of this data. I don't know if they're going to get it. They seem to think that that's private data and they don't have to provide it. I don't know. Yeah, cool. All right, I'm just going to cut it off there then. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, thanks.